So we want to
You
welcome
got it.
Dr. John Lundgren. He's an agroecologist, the director of ECDYSIS Foundation, and the CEO of Blue Dasher Farm. Dr. Lundgren received his PhD in entomology from the University of Illinois in 2004 and was a top scientist with the USDA Agricultural Research Service for about 11 years. Dr. Lundgren's research and education programs focus on assessing the ecological risk of pest management strategies and developing long-term solutions for regenerative food systems. And John received the Presidential Early Career Award for Science and Engineering by the White House. And the president at the time was Barack Obama. So if we have time at the end, I'd love to hear the story about what that was like, John. John has served as an advisor for national grant panels and regulatory agencies on pesticide and genetically modified crop risk assessments. He's written 107 peer-reviewed journal articles and authored the book, Relationships of Natural Enemies and Non-Prey Foods. Dr. Lundgren regularly interacts with the public and farmers regarding pest and farm management and insect biology. His research and education programs focus on assessing the ecological risk of pest management strategies and developing long-term solutions for sustainable food systems, something that as beekeepers, we are all definitely interested in. So welcome, John. I apologize for not getting you in as smoothly as we could, but we're so glad to have you. So you have the floor.
Okay, let me do one more thing here. I thought I had an extra hour that I don't, and so I'm just pulling something up, and I should be ready to go here in a minute. It looks like you guys have a wonderful lineup this year, so that's awesome. And I am just about ready to go. You can hear me talking through this. And yeah, I'm going to start today's talk kind of bringing everybody low, and then I'm going to bring everybody back up again. So bear with me a little bit if you don't mind. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen and I'm ready to go.
Thank you, John.
Okay, here we go. You guys can all see me and see this talk, I hope.
That looks
all right.
good.
You got it? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Let me get something to wet my whistle so I don't run out of steam. And it's so good to be here. It's actually, I was in New Mexico not too long ago, a few years back, I guess. And there was a big beekeeper meeting down there. I think it was AHPA that I was at last time I was down there. So anyways, we're going to be talking about bees, but you're not going to see a whole lot of bees in this talk. And that's kind of an abstract thought, but I think that we need to be starting to think about where bees fit into a much bigger system. This is our farm here. We have about 200 hives. So I'm a scientist, but I'm also a beekeeper and I'm also a farmer. And that makes it a little bit of a different situation than a lot of the other science that's generated. Is, you know, we're also trying to walk the talk here. And so here we go. We're gonna, yes, this is the slide that sometimes I'll open with. And yeah, the bees are dying, right? And I always ask this question to kind of nest our conversation a little bit is, you know, how many hives, how many hives died? Or when did the bees start dying, I guess? And the answer I usually get is around, 2008 is oftentimes. And then you know, how many dollars have we spent on trying to solve this problem? And you know, millions of dollars, right? And then you have to ask the question, how many bees died last year? All of ours did, right? How's that working? How's all that science working? We tried to solve this bee problem, or we tried to solve this problem thinking it was a bee problem. And that was our first critical mistake. This isn't a bee problem. It never was. Yes, the bees are dying, but this is much bigger than that. We're losing most life on Earth at this point, right? The bees are the canary in the coal mine. Um, Biodiversity, we're losing about 1% of all species on the planet every year. So we often hear thrown about, oh, in 50 years, we're going to lose all the topsoil on Earth. We're not going to be able to grow food anymore. Well, in 50 years, we're going to have lost most life on Earth too. So this is a big issue, and the changes that are needed are now, not in 10 years, not after an endowment has been established, not after a new facility has been built to study these things, right? We need answers tomorrow, kind of a thing. Biodiversity is in decline. We're losing entire habitats. It's not just species. We're losing wetlands in our area. This is a prairie that you're looking at right now. Where'd that go? We're down to about 1% of what used to be the largest biome in North America. Grassland habitats, losing those at a rapid rate. Entire insect communities. This isn't just a bee issue. We're losing entire insect communities. We're lost 60% of all insects in the last 27 years, something like that. That's one estimate at least. Butterflies, bats, birds, bees, all of these things are starting to hit. Okay, there we go. What's the problem here, right? What's the issue? Why are we losing so many things? Well, there it is, but it's not soybeans. That's not the problem. That's how we're growing our soybeans. And so agriculture is far too simplified. What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, here's a few statistics to kind of give you an idea of what it is that I'm talking about. Corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, those are 4 plant species. Currently, they occupy 5%, 4.5%, 2.5%, and 3% of the total land acres of the continental United States. 4 plant species are planted on 15% of the land surface of our country. And the only way that we can maintain yields and keep the systems productive is with chemical inputs. So things like pesticides, things like tillage, things like fertilizer. And until we change that, we're in trouble. This is the reason why the bees are dying. You can make it about the varroa mite, or you can make it about some new disease, or if you can make it about, oh, there isn't enough flowers. Well, you're right in all of those cases. But until you solve this, you can whack the rest of those problems around a little bit, but you ain't gonna get anywhere. So if you want to solve the bee problem, you have to solve the agriculture problem. Okay. What does that look like from space when it says something on the side of a jug? It says, warn your beekeeper before you spray this stuff. Yellow is corn, green is soybeans. The beekeepers are like, where do I move it to? When you live in a matrix that's surrounded by agriculture, how on earth are you supposed to, where do you go? Where do you go? There isn't any place anymore. And these pesticides don't just go away after you apply them, right? They get into the water, they get into the soil, and they get taken up by other plant species that were never treated before. Major issues that we're facing. I was reached out by a friend of mine out in eastern Montana a few years back. She said she was observing weird things in the white-tailed deer populations. This was a project that was run by a colleague of mine, and I were supervisors on it. John Jenks over at South Dakota State, he's a wildlife biologist. And Elise Hughes Berheim decided to pursue this project for a master's. What she said was that there was weird things going on in the deer out in eastern Montana. 70% of them had genital deformities, the males, and they had these weird jaw deformities. And the hunter killed deer. She wanted to know whether neonicotinoids might be contributing to that. And so Elise conquered this experiment. It was an extremely difficult experiment to run. It will never be repeated ever again. but the data is extremely important and informative in understanding the implications of pesticide use. Because on these acres that I just showed you, all of them are treated with neonicotinoid seed treatments. One corn seed has enough to kill 164,000 bees, right? So, and there's tens of thousands of these planted per acre. That's a heck of a lot of insecticide that's going into our beehives. Okay, what was this study that she ran? It was wonderful and horrible at the same time. It was a 2-year captive deer study. We had deer that were maintained under captivity for 2 generations. We monitored the health and wellness of the females as well as their offspring over this 2-year study, and we administered imidacloprid directly to the deer at different doses in their water. And then we studied their fitness. We looked at the spleens of these animals. That was the magic organ. When we looked at the spleens, it was correlated, the level of imidacloprid was correlated with a lot of response variables that we were interested in. So the dead fawns had significantly more imidacloprid in their spleens. Okay. More imidacloprid in the spleens were also associated with reduced fawn body weight, fawn organ weights, fawn thyroid hormone levels, fawn jawbone lengths. Sound familiar? You know, when we talk about, you know, how are pesticides hurting the bees? Why are our bees not doing what they're supposed to be doing? Why are they behaving so weird? I mean, you got to look at hormones, right? And we see this in mammals. Why wouldn't this be the mechanism whereby these pesticides are affecting our bees? And they are. I mean, it's clear that it is. The activity levels in the adult deer were actually slower when they had higher levels of imidacloprid in their spleens. What's a slow deer in the wild? It's a dead deer. What's a slow bee in the wild? It's a dead bee. John, that's great. Yeah, well done. You can force feed imidacloprid into those animals, but we live in reality, right? And so what's the imidacloprid levels in real deer? Well, this is how much we were able to generate under captive conditions in their spleens on average, 0.818. North Dakota ended up giving us a whole bunch of spleens, about 200 some of hunter-killed deer. Minnesota gave us 800 deer, and that's when the powers that be behind some of these chemicals ended up getting real involved. Let's put it that way. Anyways, North Dakota wild deer spleens ended up having 3 times the amount that we were able to force feed into our animals under the wild, and that we saw, or under captive conditions, and where we saw those adverse effects. Okay. The EPA disregards this study. It's peer reviewed and it's in the top 1% of all science ever written in terms of social media impact, but the regulators and the regulated dismiss it. But, you know, we can argue about, should we regulate? Should we ban pesticides all day long, right? Because there are implications on the environment, but there are also instances where farmers seem to need them, right? But I think that that latter problem is actually a false one, because I started meeting farmers all over the planet that were doing things where they were coming up to me after I was done speaking about things like predators and pollinators in farmland. And they said, you know, we don't have pests in our farms. And I said, well, what are you growing? Corn, beans, you know, wheat, alfalfa, you know, different things. I'm like, okay, and you're not using insecticides? They're like, yeah, we just don't need them. We don't have insect pests. That doesn't make sense. That's not supposed to happen, right? I mean, these farmers, pests are inevitable. Dang it. the best we can hope for is to go out there and count them. And then when they reach an economic threshold, that's when you buy a jug and you spray it on your farm, right? What these farmers were saying is that when they changed their management and focused on things called like soil health and encouraging things like cover crops and crop diversity and animal integration on their farms, that they just didn't have pests anymore. We didn't know it then. They didn't know it then. But these were the forerunners of regenerative ag. That's what it's being called right now, is regenerative agriculture. If you haven't heard about it, you need to look it up, because this is hands down the only solution to the bee problem. So you can fritter away your research dollars elsewhere if you really want to. The only way you're going to solve this issue and have live bees is going to be by investing into this. This is the long-term solution to the bee issue. And that's why we've doubled down. I committed to trying to help save the bees when we started Blue Dasher Farm and Ecdysis Foundation. And this is where we're investing it, because this is the long-term solution. It necessitated that I think about science differently, starting to work with these farmers. We went out, I got a grant, right? That's what scientists do. We write grants, and we get money, and then we go out and do research. So we have to devise sexy grants behind our computer desks, and then we come up with some good ideas that we can get funded. And that's what I did. I said, maybe we could replace some of these insecticides with cover crops in corn. And the granting agency, great idea, here's some money. And so I went out and I found some of the most progressive farmers using cover crops. And I said, do you want to work together? And they said, yeah, absolutely. I said, okay, here you go. You got to replicate this 4 times in a single field. They have to be these dimensions, each of these plots. You have to plant this particular type of corn and these cover crops, and then you have to spray the other ones out because we need controls. And the entire experiment crashed and burned, because I was taking what I knew as an expert and all of the skills that I had in science, and I applied them to this new system. And by doing so, I lost what was special about these farms. And so the next year, I said, you know what? I am not the leader here. I am not the expert. You are. The farmers are. The beekeepers are. Point me to the corn phase of your rotation. And they did. And then I said, point me to the corn phase of your neighbor's rotation, who's a conventional and successful conventional farmer. And they did that too. This became the basis of Claire Lacan's master's thesis. Again, this is a study that when it was published, I mean, it was the first peer-reviewed study that's ever compared regenerative food systems. And it has, had a tremendous impact on our understanding of how regen systems work and how we need to study them. What was so special about it is we looked at best management practices, not as defined by scientists, but as defined by farmers. We looked at this from a regional focus, and we looked at this from a systems level. Okay. There were differences among these different treatments, so the regenerative cornfields and the conventional cornfields, but there was some consistencies too. None of the regenerative cornfields used insecticides. All of the conventionals used neonicotinoid seed treatments, and they all had Bt corn, which was genetically modified corn. So we went out and we sampled insect communities. We didn't sample bees in this study, but we did in other ones. And I don't think I'll show that data today, but we looked at everything, all the critters that were living up there. And we looked at yields and we looked at profits. The insecticide treated cornfields had 10 times more pests. The insecticide-treated cornfields had 10 times the number of pests. The regenerative corn farmers did not just stop using insecticides, they replaced them with good management. Okay. And when they did, they found they didn't have insect pests anymore. They were right. And this started us down this road of regenerative agriculture. This is a solution. Okay. Yields were the same or a little lower in the regenerative farms, but the profits were twice as high. They weren't going regenerative out of some ideological decision. They were going regenerative because it was a hell of a good business decision. They were making more money. They were spending less on corn seed. They were spending less on fertilizer, and they were marketing their products in creative ways that were keeping the money in the community. That's how farming was, right? That's how farming should be again. There's a lot of money being made off of farming. It isn't by the farmers. There's a lot of money being made off of beekeeping. It ain't by the beekeepers. Yields weren't associated with profits. You want to know what was? Was how much soil organic matter they were growing in their soils. That was how much money they were making. That is money for farmers. And they need to understand that. Okay. Why was yields not? Because they're dumping so much money into producing yields that they're losing at the end of the day. That's why. Okay, what is this regenerative agriculture thing? Well, these are two outcomes that a lot of farmers traditionally are focused on: making money and growing yield, right? In regen, what ends up happening is you end up focusing on things like soil health and life, biodiversity. Bees are some of that life. And when farmers focus on these two things, they find that they're more profitable and that they're growing more nutritious food. So those are the outcomes of a regenerative system: healthy soils, life, while growing nutritious food profitably. And there's many other things that end up falling into play there, right? You've got carbon, you've got water, you've got pollinators and bee health, you've got resilience of rural communities. But these are the core drivers of that. This slide is saying what I just said. So I won't go through that again. How do they do that? How do they do that? Principles. And there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. And farmers are figuring out a lot of ways to make regenerative systems work by applying practices, right? Practices are many different things, and they're adapted for their local regions and their food that they're growing. However, they're unified by principles, and those principles are very simple. First off, they stop tilling. Tillage is what's killing the bees. That's a huge part of what's killing the bees. They never leave bare soil. They always have living roots on the ground. You know how what drives the energy, or the where the energy comes in and the productivity of a farm? It isn't in a jug. It's from the sun. And the only way that you capture that energy from the sun is with plants. Photosynthesis. And that's why the biological diversity and abundance and biomass of every other group of living organisms on this planet scales directly with how many plants are in a habitat. And when you eliminate plants from a habitat, you get a monoculture. And that's what hundreds of millions of acres in the United States currently are. They are devoid of life. So some plants are better than none, and more plant diversity is better than less. And that's the third principle. The next principle is that plants don't live on their own, and we need livestock integrated back into our farms. And that is the most regenerative farms that are out there. are reintegrating these food systems, these partitioned systems of livestock production, even bee production, right? And honey production is a part of that. They're livestock, just like anything with four hooves or two legs. And getting those back integrated together into a system is what drives the resilience of a farm. Okay. And then finally, I think the fifth principle that we apply or think of in terms of regenerative is that they're eliminating or at least drastically reducing the amount of agrochemicals. Are there ways of transferring these principles to making regenerative hives? Well, we're thinking about that really hard right now. And I think that we need to be thinking about this really hard right now, because we can criticize agriculture, and crop production, livestock production as much as we want to about how they're messing things up. But if we don't adhere to the same principles that we're telling them that they should be doing, then our bees aren't going to come out of this. Okay. So we need to walk the talk and think about this ourselves too. So I'm a beekeeper. One of the ideas that we have with Ecdysis Foundation is that the scientists have to be farmers, right? And we have to walk the talk. And so I followed the bees. I started following the bees about 6 seasons ago out to California almonds. And this is what I found. This is where most of the nation's hives go, right? The Central Valley of California used to be a wetland. And now look at it. What have we done? We're headed back out in 2 weeks. We have a big field day near Turlock. If anybody's in the area, come on out. Free food. And you can see some regenerative almond production. That's pretty amazing. So I decided, anything we do in the Midwest to save the bees is completely negated as these hives end up coming out to Central Valley of California to pollinate almonds. And so we need to also be thinking about this across borders. And so we started a project out in almonds. We talked to the almond board. We talked to a number of places that were involved out there in the almond industry. And we were told verbatim, soil health won't work here. And so meeting that wall, which we have confronted on so many different fronts, we said, okay, get out of the way and we'll show you. And so Tommy Fenster came on board. Actually, this paper is now published. I could try to share the link in the chat or whatever after I'm done speaking. It is published open access. You can see this study. Tommy did a very simple idea following up on Claire's study. He looked at regenerative almond producers versus conventional and found some. We had to scrounge in those early years in order to find regenerative producers, but he did. He found a handful of each, and we did a fence line comparison. This photo is not Photoshopped. This is actually 2 of our treatments. So these were actually operating farms. What were the regenerative farms or the orchards? No till, no pesticides were used. Perennial early ground cover was applied on those. These were the most regenerative. Compost and compost teas were used to jazz up the soil life, and then livestock integrated. They were the most regenerative. Would use their gray sheep and chickens on those trees. And so one of them actually made more money off of his broilers than he did off of the almonds, which is saying a lot because almonds are worth a lot of money. This is what we found. Soil carbon was significantly greater in the regenerative fields. Okay, so we can actually use this approach to agriculture to combat climate change. Soil health significantly improved, 30% greater. Water. This one's going to change California ag. Water infiltrates into the soil 6 times faster in the regenerative orchards. When you're trying to farm in a desert, it ain't about how much water you're getting. It's about how much water your soils can soak up and retain. And the regenerative orchards were using significantly less water. or and holding on to it. Life on these orchards was, I mean, you walk into a regenerative orchard and it just felt different. Okay, it was like immersing your senses, and that's tough to measure. You know, as a scientist, it's hard to translate emotional or feelings and experiences into numbers. But so we can show you the numbers, right? But we can't show you how it feels to be in that, and how much hope there is in sitting in a regenerative orchard or regenerative cropland. Life on these orchards was just profoundly different. There was 6 times more biomass of invertebrates, a lot more insect life. Pests, though, were exactly the same. When I showed this slide to one of our conventional producers, he said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I did everything I was supposed to do. I followed the best management practices of the universities and of the almond board, and I sprayed insecticides on my orchards. Tens of thousands of dollars I spent. 5 times last year I sprayed. And what you're telling me is the guys right across the road from me who didn't spray at all had the same amount of pests as I did. And I can't believe that." But we turned anecdote. We turned one farm into a scientific observation. And that's the power of it, right? It wasn't just an anecdote. It was replicable. All of the regenerative farms had these same responses. And that's why science is so critical in this space right now. We need success stories. We need to be able to translate that, but we also need data that shows that they're not just wackos, right? That this works. And that conventional orchard, he transferred 160 acres over to transitioning his orchard into regenerative, and we're studying that transition now. In fact, we're studying, we've gone from, I think we're up to, let's see, we've got 76 orchards that will have full systems assessments on. This is, yeah, when we got started, there was no research on regenerative agriculture or regenerative almond production in the state. Now, when we went out there last year, there was 4 other groups that were doing regenerative almond production. That was so exciting to us that we can be a part of something so important right now. 300 people are going to be at our field day next month, or rather in 2 weeks. Oh my gosh, I got to get my poop in a group. So this is a movement that's happening right now. Ecdysis Foundation likes to be the pebble that starts an avalanche, and that's what we're doing right now with Regen and almonds. There was no yield differences. We could feed the world. The almond producers, just like the corn producers, had twice the profit. They were more profitable. Okay, nah, I'm not going to go into that. I want to talk to people. I think that this is a lot of information. I will say we are starting, and we need your help, desperately need your help. We are starting the largest agricultural experiment that's ever even been attempted. Okay, we're calling it the 1,000 Farms Initiative. And what we're trying to do is across the United States. There's been a lot of press on this. You should look it up. It's getting a lot of attention from the right people, I hope. Some attention from the wrong people too, I'm sure. Does regenerative work no matter what you grow, no matter and where you grow it? How do you get there? How do you get there? How do you, farmers are developing transition strategies, right? What works, what doesn't, in order to remove the risks associated with that. We need to communicate that. There's going to be a lot of partnerships that end up coming out of this, and we're working with universities and other research organizations, NGOs all across the US and private companies as well, to try to bring things together in order to, but we're providing a spine, and their experimental spine that can really help to jazz up everybody else's efforts on this. And then, does regenerative work? I mean, does it deliver on all of these promises of being able to offset climate change and save the bees and promote rural communities and reverse desertification of our food system? Does it do those things? On each of these farms, we will be looking at the entire system, or as much of it as we can afford. Microbes, soil carbon, deep carbon, micronutrients, soil microbes, inverts, plants, birds, mammals, nutrition of the food product, economics. All right, here we are. This is where we're going to be in 2021. Well, that's where we were. This is where we'll be in 2022. No, we're not going to be in citrus. We're going to be there. Yeah, that looks about right. Working on a lot of different cropping systems across it. So we're going to be basically Michigan and West. We're looking for farms. We're looking for people to sponsor these farms. It costs us about $7,500 per field in order to run these analyses, and we want to keep it free for farmers. So if you have farmers, beekeepers are the best connected people in most agricultural communities. That is one thing I've learned over the years, is you know everybody in your food community, and you also know who's doing things right and who's doing things wrong. And you can point out to the people that are doing things right, we need to make these farmers and ranchers the champions that they are. We need your help to find them. Please, I beseech you, get our survey in front of them. We need bold action, right? Incremental progress, incremental steps. Well, look how that's got us. We need change, and we need bold action. We need people that are not just talking about change, but doing something. And that's what this experiment, it terrifies us, okay? I'm not going to lie to you. This is terrifying. But it's also, I think, why we're here. We were put here for a reason. And I can't explain it otherwise. I'm a logical person, and I cannot explain why else we would be here. So let's make some good things happen. We wouldn't be here without a wonderful group of young, enthusiastic people. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. That is where all of our science is coming out. We've got some really neat bee stuff that's just about to be published. We're just going through some more physiological assays on that. Tia Bazenitz has been working on our bee program and has some really neat stuff. So with that, I think I'd like to open it up for questions if there's time. I tried to leave about 15 minutes. I don't know if I did that successfully or not, but
John, thank you so much. You know, I must say, initially, your talk was very sobering. And I was a little worried because it was heading in a very, very dark direction. But you pulled us out of it, definitely.
There's a lot of hope right now.
You've given us a lot of hope. I mean, I think it's really, really great. It's remarkable. You know, you and your fellows are pioneers, in a sense.
Yeah, there's a bleeding edge, that's for sure. We've got some battle scars to prove it, but I do think we're in the right place at the right time to make some real change.
It's really great. So we do have a few questions. We have time for lots of questions. So folks, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A and I'll just read them off, John, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
KT Thompson asks, if someone wants to dive deeper into regenerative agriculture, where do you recommend a person study who should we seek out to learn from?
There's some really, yeah, there isn't a lot of like formalized like curricula or anything like that in regenerative ag. And oftentimes when it is there, it's made by people that aren't doing it. And so if you really want to see what's possible, get on YouTube and find some really amazing farmers. There's a number of TED Talks that are devoted to this now. David Montgomery, Kristen Olson, shoot, what's her name? She's from New Zealand and she's a good friend, and I cannot think of her name right now. They have wonderful books. Nicole Masters, that's her name. She just published another wonderful book on this. Watch The Biggest Little Farm, watch Kiss the Ground. Those are also wonderful. Watch The Pollinators. The Pollinators is a movie that actually focuses on.
Yeah. Many of us have seen both of those. Okay, great. So here in New Mexico, Kathy Grassel wants to ask that we tried in our New Mexico legislature last year with a bill to restrict neonics, and the bill did make it out of committee, but it failed on the floor because our farmers opposed it. So how do you suggest we reach this cohort with your message?
Um, so this is, yeah, we're not, we need data, we need science. We can't move forward without it, but we are not a data-driven society. That is a sobering thing for a scientist to have to admit, that it's going to take a lot more than data if we're going to change behavior. What it's going to take is relationships. It's going to take being at the table and talking with farmers and not criticizing, and understanding that, you know what, we're all trying the best that we can right now. And if they don't know that there's other solutions that are out there, then they're not going to change. And if they don't have somebody else that's speaking to them in their own language, then they're not going to change either. And so I don't know that attacking neonics has gotten us where we need to be, has it? And I'm not saying that, you know, neonics are not a horrible thing. They are. But I think that turning it into a positive discussion and pointing out, you know what, I don't know about you, but I don't like spending a lot of money I don't need to. And those damn things are costing me a lot of money. So I don't need to use it. And I've got another really good option over here with this cover crop stuff. And heck, it happens to help the bees at the same time.
Awesome. Okay, we do have an attendee named Julianne Salinas, who is currently serving as the Executive Director for Women, Food and Agriculture Network, WFAN. And she's asking how best to get in touch with Claire LeCain.
Claire is at the University of Minnesota right now. She is an extension agent, but she's not doing a lot of research anymore. If you have questions about some of the research and stuff, you're more than welcome to reach out. If you want to meet an amazing person who's really trying to help, then reach out to Claire too. So
Great. She also asks, she says she'd love to follow up with you on the 1,000 Farm Initiative, and saying that her members, the members of her organization, would definitely be interested.
Wonderful. Thank you for being the voice for this. We really need your help.
Ruth Spano has asked, why is tilling harmful?
Oh, so why is tillage harmful? Okay, so most life is linked to life in the soil, right? The productivity of a farm field is linked to life in the soil. When you till, and this counts for your gardens too, okay? When you till, you're essentially, number one is you're disrupting the microbial balance, you're disrupting the chemical balance of the soil, all right? And you're making it very difficult for water to permeate into that soil. So it changes the physical and chemical properties of soil. The only way that you end up restoring the productivity of that soil is with life, and tillage kills that too. And so what it ends up doing is it's like a nuclear bomb that goes off in your garden or on your farm, and you end up having to replace everything that life does with jugs. And so many of the toxicological problems that we end up encountering cannot be overcome unless we stop tilling. The reason for many of the herbicides that we're using, the reason for many of the fungicides and the insecticides that we're using is because of tillage.
Okay, great. So we have a question here from a beekeeper here in Santa Fe. What can we as beekeepers do to help with the research at our level outside of donating to the research?
Making sure that the people that where you're putting hives knows about this. When we have studies that come out, you guys all have, I mean, well, until Christina, got involved with our social media, I was a total tool with social media, but we all have our networks that can communicate these things, right? And so getting the science out about it is going to be really useful. Thinking about it in your own life. You know, I mean, if you have a garden, if you're eating food, know your farmer, understand what they're doing on their farms, and support the people with your own dollars. I mean, that's where changes start, right? It doesn't start, sure as hell doesn't start from the government. It starts from the bottom up. And that doesn't mean that the government doesn't have a role to play, but they follow, they don't lead. And leading is really what we need right now. So change your own life. That's where it starts.
So we did ask about, farmers in particular, but Ekaterina Davidenko is asking, how do we convince our neighbors to stop spraying weed killers?
Hmm. Boy, I love the slide that Marla shows every once in a while in her talks where she has turned her entire front yard into a pollinator garden. There's something really beautiful about that. And that becomes another situation of leadership, doesn't it? Where in your own community, you might look like a wacko, but some people are going to start looking at that and realizing, you know what, that change wasn't so bad after all. And so lead by example, step one. And boy, uh, be a neighbor and a friend. I think that those are two really powerful tools. When our neighbors to the north of us, so we had an issue this last year that a lot of the farmers started calling us and they were like, yeah, so we're going to spray, chlorpyrifos because we've got a spider mite problem. And, and so we wanted to tell you so you could, I don't cover your bees. Oh God, we're hosed, right? I mean, there's not, yeah, that ain't going to do anything, right? There's no place for us to move. The whole damn county was spraying it. And I'm like, who told you this? And he's like, well, the local co-op drove around and they sampled. I'm like, we have scientists here, and we actually are entomologists. We could go out and look at your field. And my neighbor, who's actually, he threatens my life every year, but he's like, sure, you can go out and take a look if you want to. And so we went out, and he didn't have spider mites, right? He didn't have bean leaf beetles. He wasn't at a treatment threshold. A few days later, chlorpyrifos was banned. And I think the word got out to all the chemical dealers: sell as much as you can, as fast as you can. And so we talked to all of our neighbors, and we just said, we would love to help you. If you ever have questions about insect pests, we would like to be there and offer you advice, or be there to at least give you a second opinion, because we're not selling you anything. And that friendship and those neighborly ties ended up growing. He didn't spray. He wanted to be a good neighbor. As much as, he thinks I'm crazy, and his values were he was in, yeah, that mattered to him. And if I had gone guns a-blazing, oh, you got to ban this stuff, it would have fell on dead ears. So I let him beat the heck out of me again, but he ended up doing the right thing.
That's a great story. I go to the big box stores and I see those pallets of Roundup, and small harvest stores, pallets and pallets of Roundup, and home pest spray, big gallon jugs with sprayers on them. And I'll tell you, it freaks me out every time I go in there. Like, who is buying this stuff and how are they using it? It's just, it's really upsetting. Let's see.
Yeah.
I have a question from one of our biggest beekeepers here in New Mexico, also one of our primary educators for our certified beekeeper program, is Craig Norlander. He wants to know, are you doing anything in New Mexico? I have 75 acres and I would love to be part of your studies. I have bees and cows now.
Please register your ranch into our system. You can find the link on www.ecdysis.bio. ECDYSIS. And Christina put a link up so everybody can register their field. We're recruiting farms right now. And yes, we would love to be in New Mexico. So this is a monumental experiment, right? It's going to be a challenge to conduct. One of the ways that we're trying to get it done as efficiently as possible is through clusters. And so if it's one farm in New Mexico, chances are good we're not going to be able to get there. But if we find a dozen farms in an area, then game on.
Excellent. Thomas Bird wants to know, how long does it take to transition a conventional farm to a regenerative farm?
Oh, what a great question. We're learning that right now. We just completed a 3-year survey up in Canada. Actually, there was 60 farms that were transitioning over to regenerative, and we started in sort of year 0. And just one story from it that might be near and dear to your guys' hearts is we started putting caterpillars out and seeing what kind of predators were out there, thinking, insecticides are meant to kill, pests. And so we can use this as a surrogate for pest management. Year 1, 25% of these caterpillars got eaten. Year 2, 50% got eaten. Whoa, double. Year 3, 75% of these caterpillars were eaten in 1 hour. You don't need insecticides. Probably after year 1 would be my guess. So these transitions happen. But the other interesting element is that we haven't seen an asymptote yet. I mean, obviously, when it reaches 100%, it's going to asymptote. You can't get much better than that. But we haven't seen the full potential reached. And that is so exciting to me. To see what these farmers are doing out there and what's possible is really inspiring.
That's awesome. Okay, Julianne is back with a question. How can farmers best terminate their cover crops without using toxic herbicides? This is a challenge for our farmers are facing, especially with Bayer and others offering incentives.
Yeah. So that's another element of where the animals need to fit in. So on our own farm, Blue Dasher Farm, when you're in South Dakota, come for a visit, please. We are trying to maintain annual cropping systems within perennial warm season grasses. And sometimes we're good at that. Sometimes we're real bad at that. It's a challenging thing because we're not using tillage and we're not using herbicides on our own farm. The tools that we have are fire and grazing. And the timing of each of those ends up becoming critical. And if it doesn't work, then those are two good tools. Plant biology and plant competition is really useful. Having clean fields should never be the goal. So trying to establish your crop within covers is another wonderful option. Mowing would be another option. There's a lot of good tools that are out there. So there tends to be a myopic view of, okay, either I've got tillage or herbicides. Those are my 2 tools. And the wonderful thing is that those are not the only 2 tools.
Great, thank you. Melanie says or asks, well, she started by saying impactful presentation, looking forward to the integration of more relationships, as you mentioned, including indigenous land stewards who have been practicing regenerative, holistic, biodynamic agriculture for generations. What are some action steps that you can recommend for folks, like calling legislators?
That might be one possibility here. Let me get this thing open and I will paste the link into, oops, nope, it's in the Zoom link. Okay, here's a link to register farms. People can take that, rob that off and get your farms registered. I can also stop sharing unless am I still sharing? I don't think.
No, you're fine.
Action items. Yeah, I mean, talking to your legislatures, that's fine. I think growing your community is going to be more impactful at this stage of things. but certainly we need policymakers that are involved in understanding what's going on, and they need to know that there's real data behind this, and they need to know, dang it, that this is not just a couple of quacks that are out there, that there's real interest in this as a solution and real opportunities as a solution.
Great. Robert Busser has a few questions and comments. Are there examples of regenerative farming in a desert climate, such as New Mexico, where the rainfall is 6 inches or less per year?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're actually using this to reverse desertification in many areas. But there's also, when you're in a desert, I don't know that that means you should grow corn. I mean, you have to work with your landscape, right? And so there might be some wonderful opportunities for regenerating plant communities and things like that using animals and grazing systems. But growing high intensity dairies or something like this in a water poor area might not be the best option. So we got to think about the ecological context of a landscape and look at what was there, and then see how some of our agroecosystem surrogates might conform to that landscape, so that we're not battling against nature quite so hard.
Excellent. Let's see, Ryan Miller wants to know, is there any movement to connect these farms to food banks throughout the country to help get the message out some more?
Sorry, I just, let me post that link in the full chat. Sorry, I did only to other people's. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, is there any movement to connect the farms, the 1,000 farms, to food banks throughout the country to help get the message out some more?
Not yet, but that's another wonderful collaborative opportunity. We're really looking forward to all of those opportunities, because there is a lot of folks that are just getting going in this space right now. They understand that this is really important. So yeah, I guess that yeah, not yet, but I hope so.
Yeah, it's clear from the questions. We haven't gotten through all of them yet, but you have a lot of people excited about regenerative farming. Michaela Henry says, I would love for my dollars to support farms that practice regenerative farming. I've done Google searches for local farms in my area, but with no luck. Maybe it's not common enough yet, but is there a directory or something that you know of where we can find farms that are doing this? Will the 1,000
No,
farms
but I'm
project- Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. That's the whole goal of the 1,000 Farms project, is to start bringing these farms out into the light a little bit. It's anonymized, right? But one of the biggest hindrances to, I think, to adoption here is that farmers are, when you try to change and you're isolated socially, being a wacko or doing something different is really hard, and there isn't a lot of support network. But built into the 1,000 Farms initiative is that support, and having that community where you have somebody that you can talk to. That was really the whole idea behind the Dices Foundation and Blue Dasher Farm. Why did we put it in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota? Well, this is the battlefront, right? This is where ground zero is for change. And we want science to become a part of food communities again. And so since putting it here, we've really influenced. I feel like we've been a part of that. I can't say that we're the influence, right? Because we'll never know that. But I do think us being here is a good thing. And the community that has kind of evolved and developed around Blue Dasher Farm has been really, yeah, I'm proud of that.
And you should be. We have a comment. That was a great lead into a comment from Melanie. She says, grateful for researchers such as yourself who are helping to quantify the practices of these once labeled alternative farmers. This style of farming should become conventional.
It will. We don't have a choice, right? That's the other element here is we need change right now. And this, Right. We don't have an alternative. Either we change our food system and probably within the next 10 years, or we're not going to be around much longer.
Okay, well, back to that sobering Dr. Lundgren. But thank you for that. So just a couple more questions. I think we're almost through them all. Teresa wants to know, is there a size requirement to be part of the study?
Not yet. We're trying to hit the average size for each food system and region as kind of our goal. But there's also really important like urban gardens and other areas that are important in terms of touching people's lives. And so we'll just see how this evolves, I guess. We're not register your farm. That's step one in the whole thing, or your whatever it is that you're doing. Because then we know what the lay of the land is and where priorities are. We're letting the farmers kind of guide this effort to some degree.
Okay, that's great. Well, John, I want to thank you again on behalf of New Mexico beekeepers. You've done really well today. I think you've created over 100 new disciples who will be spreading the message here in New Mexico. So
All
thank you
right.
so much.
Well, we wouldn't be here without you guys. Thank you so much for giving us some time, and yeah, spread the word.